Old Hollywood ran on glamour, silence, and cover-ups. Studios had fixers, police had arrangements, journalists had envelopes. And behind all of it were actors whose drinking did not just slow productions or embarrass publicists. It ended careers, broke bones, killed people, and in more than a few cases, ended lives. These were not sad stories kept private. These were crashes, assaults, arrests, destroyed marriages, and deaths that studios scrambled to bury before the morning papers ran. This is the full list. 20 of the most dangerous drunks the golden age of Hollywood ever produced. If you are new here, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video. It helps more than you know. Now let us get into it. Gail Russell. Paramount signed Gail Russell when she was 18 years old. And from the beginning, she was a contract actress who could barely survive a camera pointed at her. Stage fright ran so deep that she could not work sober, and alcohol became the only thing that got her through a day on set. The arrests started coming in November 1953, when police jailed her overnight on a drunk driving charge. A Santa Monica court followed that with a $150 fine, a 2-year ban from bars and nightclubs, and a court order requiring medical treatment. In February 1955, she struck a second vehicle carrying a couple and their infant, and the lawsuit that followed settled for $30,000. The worst came at 4 in the morning on the 4th of July, 1957, when Russell drove her convertible directly through the front wall of a restaurant on Beverly Boulevard and injured the janitor working inside. She failed a field sobriety test, missed her scheduled court date, and was found unconscious from drinking when officers came to her home. The sentence was a $420 fine, 30 days suspended, and 3 years of probation. Russell died 4 years later at the age of 36, and when her body was found, an empty vodka bottle was on the floor beside her. If this is the kind of content you enjoy, subscribe now so you never miss a video like this one. Broderick Crawford. Broderick Crawford won the Academy Award for Best Actor in 1950 for All the King's Men, and 5 years after that, he was starring in Highway Patrol, a television series built around stopping reckless and impaired drivers on California roads. His personal record moved in the opposite direction. In November 1952, he spent several hours in a Los Angeles jail following a drunk driving arrest. The incidents continued through the years he spent playing Chief Dan Matthews, and eventually his driver's license was suspended entirely. The California Highway Patrol reportedly started calling him Old 502, a reference to the radio code officers used when reporting a drunk driver in the field. Some of the driving sequences in his own series reportedly had to be staged specifically because he was no longer legally permitted to operate a vehicle on public roads. Richard Harris. Richard Harris ran with the hard-drinking circle of British and Irish actors who treated benders as a point of pride, and by his own admission, he once stepped out to buy a bottle of milk and did not return home for 5 days. In London and New York, his nights ended in pub fights and street confrontations. When the drinking reached a certain point, he reportedly walked into moving traffic and threw punches at cars with his bare hands. In Rome, he took a film executive to a bar specifically to demonstrate that he did not always cause the violence. A drunk American tourist across the room tested that theory, and Harris dragged him outside and knocked him down within the hour. His first wife, Elizabeth Reese Williams, later described the marriage as life with a man who smashed furniture and faces when the alcohol took hold. Harris himself acknowledged he had been completely out of control during those years. In 1981, a doctor told him he had 18 months to live if he kept drinking, and Harris stopped. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra's drinking did not always produce the polished Rat Pack imagery that his legend is built on. His wife Barbara later wrote in her memoir that gin made him cruel, and that whenever she saw a gin bottle appear, she went directly to her bedroom and locked the door. In the fall of 1949, Sinatra left a Palm Springs party with Ava Gardner, both of them heavily drunk, and the two drove to India, where Sinatra produced 2 firearms and began shooting out streetlights. Gardner joined in and put a bullet through the window of a hardware store. Armed officers brought them both in, and the studio paid to suppress the story before it reached print. From Here to Eternity in Hawaii, Sinatra and Montgomery Clift arrived at 5 in the morning, having both passed out from drinking during the flight over. Burt Lancaster later said he regularly had to put Sinatra, Clift, and screenwriter James Jones to bed after their nightly sessions. In September 1967, following 2 consecutive nights of drinking and gambling at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, Sinatra wrecked furniture, damaged the hotel switchboard, drove a baggage cart through a plate glass window and overturned a table in the casino. When he tried to strike casino executive Carl Cohen with a chair, Cohen punched him hard enough to knock the dental caps off his front teeth. Frances Farmer. The legal history of Frances Farmer began on October 19, 1942, when Santa Monica police pulled her over because her headlights were too bright under wartime blackout regulations. She had no valid license, appeared intoxicated, and spent the night in custody. The court imposed a $500 fine and a suspended jail sentence of 180 days. Farmer paid half the fine, left for Mexico before paying the rest, and was reportedly arrested there on charges of drunk and disorderly conduct and disturbing the peace. A bench warrant was eventually issued in Los Angeles for the unpaid balance. When police located her at a Hollywood hotel, she fought the arrest and had to be physically removed from the lobby. At her hearing, Farmer hurled an inkwell at the presiding judge. When a court officer asked about her drinking habits, she stated that she put alcohol into her milk, her coffee, and her orange juice. As officers escorted her from the room, she knocked one officer down, left bruises on a second, and was physically carried out of the courthouse while screaming. On January 21, 1943, she was committed to the psychiatric ward of Los Angeles General Hospital. Errol Flynn Warner Brothers began running out of patience with Errol Flynn in the late 1940s. During the production of Silver River in 1948, Jack Warner documented complaints that Flynn had repeatedly reached a state of incoherence from drinking during working hours. Flynn also drank through lunch breaks and ruined multiple takes by improvising crude jokes at the camera when his back was to the director. He developed methods to conceal alcohol on set, favoring Bloody Marys because tomato juice disguised the smell, and reportedly injecting oranges with vodka so he could consume alcohol between scenes without anyone noticing. At bars, the drinking regularly produced physical confrontations. He was once arrested on a public intoxication charge after stealing an officer's badge during a dispute. While in Australia and visibly drunk, he accepted a boxing challenge from a fighter named Bud Riley, lasted 3 rounds, and was beaten badly enough that he later said he could not chew food for 3 days afterward. By the 1950s, Flynn traveled with a small suitcase labeled Flynn Enterprises that contained vodka, quinine water, glassware, and a Bible. George C. Scott, George C. Scott described his relationship with alcohol as a genuine addiction and made no effort to soften the characterization. By 1971, Time magazine was already publishing accounts of broken noses he had collected in barroom confrontations, and Scott acknowledged that men routinely challenged him because of the tough screen image he had built. The most serious allegations came from Ava Gardner, who worked alongside him on John Huston's The Bible in 1964. Gardner said that when Scott was drunk, he broke into her hotel rooms in Italy, in London, and at the Beverly Hills Hotel. During one drunken episode, he smashed bottles in her room and threatened her with broken glass while demanding that she agree to marry him. His behavior also disrupted productions. He destroyed a dressing room on at least one occasion and was placed under medical supervision to sober up during another production. Robert Walker. Robert Walker's drinking became a visible public problem in the period following his separation from Jennifer Jones, who left him for producer David O. Selznick. Shortly after the split, Walker was arrested for driving under the influence after he struck a truck with his Chrysler and drove away from the scene without stopping. Jail photographs ran in the newspapers and damaged the wholesome image he had spent years building in films like Since You Went Away and The Clock. His second marriage to Barbara Ford in 1948 lasted only months before she left, citing violent behavior when he drank. Walker later received treatment at the Menninger Clinic in Topeka, Kansas, and returned to work to give what many consider his finest performance as Bruno Anthony in Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train. On August 28, 1951, Walker's housekeeper found him in a severely distressed state. His psychiatrist administered amobarbital. Walker had reportedly been drinking that evening and died the same night at 32 years old. Robert Mitchum drank Scotch whiskey from a water glass with no ice and treated it the same way other people treat morning coffee, refilling it steadily throughout the day. Director Sidney Pollack observed the habit firsthand while directing him in the Yakuza. Mitchum also carried a reputation for physical confrontations during his drinking, and one brawl reportedly left heavyweight boxer Bergen Reynolds hospitalized. The most publicly damaging work incident came in 1955 during the production of Blood Alley. Mitchum was cast opposite Lauren Bacall, then removed from the production before cameras rolled. Reports circulated that he had been drinking heavily, creating problems on set, and had thrown the film's transportation coordinator into San Francisco Bay. Mitchum denied the account. John Wayne stepped in and took the lead role himself. A separate story involved producer David O. Selznick. Mitchum said he consumed at least 8 double scotches before arriving at Selznick's penthouse to discuss a potential project, and at some point during the meeting he urinated on the carpet. He did not receive the part. Ava Gardner. After settling in Madrid in 1955, Ava Gardner built a lifestyle around late nights, flamenco clubs, bullfighters, and continuous drinking. She was known to have a chauffeur drive her through the city while she worked through an entire thermos of gin in the back seat. She was refused entry to the Ritz in Madrid after an incident in the hotel lobby involving public intoxication. The St. Regis in New York eventually barred her as well after she poured a drink down the trousers of the hotel's owner during an argument. In Havana, she met Fidel Castro at the Havana Hilton and spent time drinking with him. A confrontation later developed between Gardner and Marita Lorenz, who served as Castro's translator. Lorenz said Gardner was drunk, accused her of concealing Castro's whereabouts, followed her into an elevator, and struck her across the face. One of Castro's armed bodyguards intervened, and Castro decided Gardner needed to leave Havana immediately. She died in London on January 25, 1990, at 67 years old. Spencer Tracy, before Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, transformed Spencer Tracy into one of its most prestigious leading men. His reputation in New York was already built around being a violent and unpredictable drunk. According to Barbara Leaming's biography of Katharine Hepburn, he spent nights in brothels, started fights, and was known among madams for having once beaten a woman. The drinking followed him to Los Angeles, where reports placed him at fights at the home of director John Ford and in at least one incident involving a collision with a parked vehicle in an alley. MGM fixer Howard Strickling reportedly handled the expenses and paperwork that followed. During the production of Marie Galante in June 1934, Tracy failed to appear for work and was eventually located nearly unconscious in his hotel room following a binge that had lasted 2 weeks. Fox removed him from the payroll, sent him to a hospital, and was sued by the production for $125,000 in delays. At MGM during the filming of Riff Raff in 1936, and Jean Harlow reportedly walked off the set and told producers she would not return until Tracy was sober. Oliver Reed. Oliver Reed had already established himself in pubs across London long before he became a major film star in the 1960s. In 1964, an argument at the Crazy Elephant nightclub in Leicester Square ended with 2 men following him into the restroom and attacking him with broken bottles. Surgeons needed 63 stitches to close the wounds on one side of his face. On a visit to London to discuss a potential film project, Steve McQueen joined Reed for what turned into an all-night crawl through pubs, and McQueen later said Reed became so intoxicated that he vomited on him. Television appearances became incidents. On The Tonight Show in 1975, Shelley Winters poured whiskey over his head after comments he made about women's liberation. He was removed from a Channel 4 program after arriving drunk and attempting to forcibly kiss writer Kate Millett on air. During the production of Cutthroat Island in 1995, Reed arrived to the set severely intoxicated following a bar fight and was dismissed from the picture. On May 2, 1999, during a break from shooting Gladiator in Malta, Reed spent an evening drinking with Royal Navy sailors in a local bar, collapsed and died at 61. Jack Pickford. Jack Pickford operated in the shadow of his sister Mary Pickford's enormous fame, and that shadow gave him protection from consequences that would have ended a lesser name. His reputation in the silent era covered drinking, drugs, gambling, and affairs. In 1920, he and his wife, actress Olive Thomas, spent an evening drinking in Paris before returning to their suite at the Hotel Ritz in the early morning hours. Thomas consumed mercury bichloride, a poisonous compound prescribed to Jack for external use only. French police investigated the death and ruled it accidental. His subsequent marriages were described as abusive relationships fueled by alcoholism and drug dependency. Pickford died in Paris in 1933 at 36, and his death was attributed to illness connected to years of alcoholism. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton arrived at Warner Brothers with the kind of looks that studios could build a career around, and her drinking helped dismantle that career with remarkable speed. In 1951, she was engaged to actor Franchot Tone while maintaining a relationship with actor Tom Neal. After a night of heavy drinking, Tone and Payton returned home to find Neal already there. A fight broke out and Tone ended up in the hospital with significant facial injuries. Payton turned the situation into a publicity opportunity, visiting Tone in white furs and dark glasses while bringing him martinis and a thermos during his recovery. She married Tone shortly after, left him within weeks, and returned to Neil. By the late 1950s, her arrests covered bad checks, public drunkenness, and disorderly conduct. In 1963, she was arrested on Sunset Boulevard in a vice case. In February 1967, police found her unconscious behind a drugstore dumpster on Sunset Boulevard. She died 3 months later, on May 8, 1967, at 39. Peter O'Toole's drinking was already a management problem before Lawrence of Arabia made him an international star. Staff at the Bristol Old Vic reportedly ran a telephone line to a nearby pub and connected it to the theater bell so they could call him back before curtain. After the film released, the stories grew proportionally larger. On his first American television appearance with Johnny Carson, O'Toole arrived so drunk that he broke his glasses, used profanity on air, and left the set within minutes of sitting down. He took a young Michael Caine out to dinner one evening, and Caine later said he woke up in a stranger's flat with no memory of the intervening days, and that the two of them had been permanently banned from the restaurant where the night began. In Ireland, O'Toole and actor Peter Finch were refused service after closing time at a pub they had been drinking in. O'Toole offered to purchase the building on the spot and wrote out a check. He came back sober the following morning and tore it up. In 1976, surgeons removed most of his stomach and the entirety of his pancreas. Richard Burton's drinking became a destabilizing force across film sets, hotel suites, and every room he shared with Elizabeth Taylor during the years of their marriage. By the 1960s, their relationship had become a public exhibition of drunken violence, with smashed televisions, demolished hotel rooms, and arguments that played out across 3 continents and every gossip column that covered Hollywood. Studio executive Spyro Skouras later alleged that during one altercation, Taylor sustained 2 black eyes and an injured nose and required 22 days of recovery before she could return to filming. Taylor publicly attributed her injuries to a car accident. On set, Burton became unreliable. Close friends described him as an angry drinker who sometimes had to be physically carried to his mark. During the production of The Klansman in 1974, Burton acknowledged consuming between 2.5 and 3 bottles of vodka per day, and many of his scenes were filmed with him seated or lying down because he could not consistently stand. He entered St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica following the shoot, and he and Taylor divorced later that year. Zsa Zsa Gabor's most significant legal incident began on June 14, 1989. When Beverly Hills motorcycle officer Paul Kramer pulled her over for driving with expired registration tags on her $215,000 Rolls-Royce Corniche. Kramer also found that her driver's license had expired and that there was an open flask of Jack Daniels inside the vehicle. While Kramer was processing the violations, Gabor drove away. He stopped her a second time. During the second confrontation, she slapped him across the face. Gabor maintained that the officer had handled her roughly. Kramer said the slap was entirely unprovoked. In September 1989, a jury found her guilty of battery against a police officer, operating a vehicle without a valid license, and possessing an open container of alcohol. On October 25th, Judge Charles Rubin sentenced her to 3 days in jail, $12,937 in fines and restitution, 120 hours of community service, and a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. She served her 3 days in July 1990. Tierney. Torrance Tierney became famous in 1945 playing John Dillinger on screen, and the years that followed produced an arrest record that eventually surpassed the length of his filmography. Between 1944 and 1951, Los Angeles police arrested him at least 12 times on charges involving brawling and public drunkenness. He ripped a pay telephone off a bar wall during one incident. He struck a waiter in the face with a sugar bowl after being refused further drinks in another. In a separate episode, he attempted to choke a taxi driver while intoxicated. The jail sentences followed in a regular pattern. In May 1947, he served 3 months for brawling. In 1951, he received 90 days after fracturing the jaw of a college student in a New York bar fight. In 1952, Chicago authorities held him for 66 days on drunk and disorderly charges. In August 1953, he was arrested in New York following a fight with a bar's pianist. In October 1958, police took him into custody outside a Manhattan establishment on charges of resisting arrest and assaulting 2 officers. Tierney later reflected that he had thrown away approximately 7 careers through drinking. Mayo Methot was a Warner Brothers actress when she married Humphrey Bogart in 1938, and the marriage she entered into would eclipse anything she had built on screen. Both drank heavily and consistently, and their relationship became notorious enough that the press assigned it a name, the Battling Bogarts. Their house was nicknamed Sluggy Hollow by neighbors who regularly heard broken glass, shouted profanity, and what witnesses described as occasional gunfire. Methot threw furniture, plants, dishes, and whatever else was within reach during their arguments. In one fight, she drove a knife into Bogart's shoulder. In another, both of them reportedly struck each other with whiskey bottles. Actress Gloria Stewart, who attended dinner parties at their home, said she witnessed Methot produce a pistol while drunk and threatened to shoot Bogart in front of the other guests. Stewart also reported seeing bruises on Methot's face and watching the couple exchange physical blows during those evenings. A night of heavy drinking in Italy, during which Methot insisted on singing for John Huston and Bogart in a nightclub, reportedly inspired the drunken performance scene in Casablanca. Bogart ended the marriage in 1944. Methot died in Portland in 1951 at 47, with her death attributed to acute alcoholism. William Holden's drinking tended to reach its most dangerous moments not in nightclubs or bar fights but vehicles, hotel rooms, and private spaces where no one else was present to witness what was happening. The incident that reached the criminal courts came on July 26, 1966, near Pisa, Italy, where Holden was driving a Ferrari that collided with another car. The other driver, a man named Valerio Giorgio Novelli, died following the crash. Italian authorities opened a manslaughter investigation, and alcohol was a factor in the inquiry. The case concluded with an 8-month suspended prison sentence and a civil damages payment to Novelli's family. The drinking continued through the rest of his career and became increasingly visible on screen as the years passed. His final incident came in November 1981 when Holden was alone in his Santa Monica apartment. He was reportedly intoxicated when he fell and struck his head against a bedside table. His body was discovered several days after the fall. 20 names, 20 careers that alcohol bent, broke, or ended entirely. Some of these people destroyed others, some destroyed themselves. And most of what happened was kept out of the papers by the people paid to keep it there. If you made it this far, leave a comment with which story surprised you the most. And if you enjoyed this video, please like it, share it, and subscribe to the channel.